In order to make sure that my analysis of the lost pages wasn't longer than 55 minutes, I had to cut a large portion of content, so I decided to set them aside for separate videos. This one will take a look at some of the world building, the text adventure of Atreus' call from the wilds, and the mysterious black runestone that was on display at PSX last year. In response to the possibility that a future God of War title may tackle Mayan mythology, some leveled the criticism that it isn't possible to do so while maintaining a degree of historical accuracy. This is because of the large gap that exists between the eras of pre-migration Scandinavia and the Maya civilization. For those that may not know, the classic period of Maya civilization took place between 250 to 900 AD, which coincides with the time of the Vikings, which started from around 790 AD. This game is said to take place long before the Vikings arrived in Scandinavia, when the Norse gods walked the earth, and it will explain why they aren't around anymore. Some of them held the belief that they were abandoned by the gods, but it might be because Ragnarok had already happened, resulting in most of them not being around anymore. Different mythological belief systems coexist in the God of War universe, but paying closer attention to Corey's explanation reveals that they are actually at various stages of development. It therefore means that not all corners of the world will be inhabited by pantheons of gods, because some are yet to be born. The Mayan gods, for example, probably don't exist in Central America yet, so I wouldn't classify them as being out there during the events of this game. Kratos is cursed to walk the earth forever, so there is potential for him to stumble across an era in Central America after the Mayan gods were born, when they were at the peak of their influence and power. Alternatively, if they wanted to cap the story at the moment the three wise men journeyed to Bethlehem, as the original game foretold, they could approach the Mayan timeline in a similar way to the Viking one. However, the timing is definitely right for the gods of ancient Egypt to exist while Kratos is on his journey in Scandinavia. If the statue of Hathor is anything to go by, there might be references to this in the upcoming game that are more explicit than the note that we got in Ascension about the land of the pharaoh. It's why I think Egyptian mythology is the most likely candidate after a Norse trilogy of stories are completed. Corey spoke of developing a timeline behind the scenes that pieces together the events of the Greek era with what has occurred in other geographical locations like the one that Norse myth covers. Things that won't be addressed in the upcoming game that are most likely to do with other mythologies can be found on this timeline, but it is very closely guarded. I would personally love to have a look at it, so one can hope that they decide to publish it one day, but I can see why it might be sensitive to do so now when there are details that are still subject to change. It does nevertheless showcase an attention to detail to the world that Kratos exists in that we never had before, and points to the potential of the series becoming like Assassin's Creed in venturing to different geographical points of history. I also want to discuss a few things that stood out to me while playing the text adventure on Facebook Messenger about the story of Atreus' call from the wilds. When Atreus passes out in the story trailer, I initially thought that it may have been due to an illness that he contracted from a different realm. After peering deeper into the story of his first foray out of the forest around him, it appears that he may have been suffering from this illness long before he goes on the adventure with Kratos to lift his curse. Atreus gets woozy at one point in the cabin after he wakes up, his vision blurs and then he faints. His mother catches him before he hits the floor and places him in his bed under several blankets. If it was something he was born with, it really puts me in two minds as to the identity of his mother, because this is a vulnerability that only humans have. You could still make the case that she is a goddess and that it is Kratos' half-human side coming out, but I don't really know. It definitely increases the likelihood that she is a Norse human warrior from a tribe in Midgard. Atreus seems to be ignorant on his status as part god as well up until Kratos tells him, further suggesting that his mother is a human. She may have kept secrets from him just like Kratos though, and the Witch of the Woods does add that it is no ordinary illness. I might be looking too much into this and he may have simply collapsed because he was too cold, but there just seems to be an aura of fragility around him that suggests he is already dealing with a bigger problem like an illness. It would explain why he feels insecure about being weak compared to Kratos, but this could also be because he simply isn't as comfortable in combat. I wouldn't be surprised if he partially blamed himself for the death of his mother in not being strong enough to protect her, in a similar way to how Kratos blamed himself for not being able to protect Deimos. A case can be presented for her being a human or a god, as we have compelling evidence for both sides of the argument. She could really be anyone, so I think the outcome will still be surprising no matter how much you have looked into her identity. The Norse goddess Eif is specifically mentioned in a book that lists ingredients for a healing salve that Atreus picks up in the cabin. She was the goddess associated with medical skill, and her name means help or mercy in Old Norse. Eif was based in Asgard and would heal the gods that lived there of any injuries. She was also a Valkyrie, and her role was more sanguine in nature when compared to the other Valkyries. Instead of deciding which warriors go to Valhalla, Eif could actually let soldiers live and return to good health. There isn't much else that we can gather from the sources that we have on Norse mythology, which must have given room to the team to craft their own story for her if she is to be featured more prominently. When Atreus hears the cry of a wounded animal inside his head, he also hears a voice in ancient Norse promising adventure and heroism, prompting him to go after it. If you try to head back to the cabin halfway through the journey, the voice tries to stop you from doing so, implying that you are a coward. Whoever it is clearly trying to put him in danger, knowing of the Draga that lie in wake of the dying animal. This trap sounds right up the alley of Loki, the god of mischief, who probably starts out with trying to get him killed indirectly before moving to more outright means. Odin knows that Atreus will have a role to play in Ragnarok, and Loki would carry out his will from time to time, so it's certainly within the realm of possibility, but it could be anyone. After Kratos saves Atreus from a Draga and they start to make their way back home, they encounter a pack of wolves commanded by a revenant. It is revealed that revenants can bend them to their will, explaining why we see them together in this screenshot from the God of War website. Between Loki's powers to shapeshift, Thor's responsibilities in Midgard, and Odin's form as the Wanderer, the Norse gods could literally be anywhere, which is quite an exciting prospect for how things might play out in this game. I always wondered what went into the decision to make Zeus look like Odin when he appeared before Kratos as the Gravedigger, and whether it was intentional. Before the developers confirmed it was Zeus, it was fun speculating with people that it was actually Odin all along. Seeing as this game might be the first installment of a trilogy, I would not be surprised if Odin didn't even make a proper appearance until the sequel. Some may remember that Zeus wasn't shown properly until God of War 2, so it wouldn't be unusual for the series. If Odin does show up though, I really hope it's in his form as the Wanderer, because of the way that it might affect Kratos in showing him the similarities. He already believes that godhood is a disease, and someone like Odin would only strengthen that conviction further. But Kratos is a different man now, and despite this firm belief, I don't think he'll be after Odin's head, because he does not want to fall down that rabbit hole again. This brings me onto the black runestone that was on display at PSX, because it represents what the actual narrative thrust of the game will be. When I stumbled upon what it was, it kind of blew my mind because of how much it connects to what I've been saying about Kratos wanting to change Atreus' destiny in order to move him out of harm's way. Corey described it as a key artifact and a main story point in the game, but didn't go any further than that. This is because the symbol on it represents the web of Wyrd. Wyrd is the Old English term for fate, so I will be referring to it as the web of fate from here on in. Its counterpart in Old Norse is the term Urd, which was also one of the names of the three main Norns. Urd was the Norn that corresponded to the past. As you may have guessed already, this web is woven by the Norns, who decide the fate of every living being in the Norse universe, even the gods themselves. It is an indication that Kratos will be trying to get to this web at some point in the game to prevent Atreus' strand from being directly intertwined with the events that build up to Ragnarok, thereby changing his destiny. It's very telling that lines resembling compass points surround the representation of this web, so I think that Kratos might be using this artifact to guide him to its location. The developers have spoken about making all of God of War's features contextual in this new world that would otherwise normally remind you that you're playing a game. The main example is upgrading your weapons through the blacksmith's Brock and Sindri instead of doing it through blood orbs in a menu. Now that we are dealing with areas that are a lot more open with forks in the road to get lost in, this runestone would be a good way of guiding the player back to the critical path if they wanted to continue the main story. You may be wondering why the notions of the past, the present and the future are rendered in the concept of a web, since it suggests a non-linear conception of time, and you would be onto something if so. The emblem is made up of 9 staves that are arranged in an intricate pattern, such that you can find all of the shapes of the Norse runes inside. This is a symbol of how all past, present and future outcomes are connected and dependent on each other, like the lines in this pattern and the strands of a web. It corresponds to the Tree of Life, and we can examine this further by looking at how the Norse belief system used the concept of the tree, and in particular the flow of water, to define the way that destiny works. Yggdrasil grows from the well of Wyrd, whose water nourishes the tree. The well represents the past and it influences the growth of the tree, which represents the present. This explains why the Norns had to carry on Kratos' unresolved karmic cycle when Atreus was born, and how it influenced his future. However, the water cycle expresses a circular passage of time because the dewdrops that are shed by the leaves of the tree flow back into the well of Wyrd. This means that influencing the course of water in the present through your own actions can have an effect on the water that drops back into the well, thereby altering how the past influences the present and beyond. As a result, all beings had some degree of power over their own destiny and the destiny of others. The debate of how much free will we have is still very relevant today, and the Norse belief system arrived somewhere in the middle. People could not escape the influence of the Norns, but there was no such thing as having a fate that was unalterable, in contrast to Greek mythology. Kratos might be looking at a more active means, like interfering with Atreus' strand in the Norns' web of fate because of his struggle in connecting with his son, to change its connections passively. Since all of life was depicted as an interconnected web, it is said that the slightest thrumming of one strand can cause the whole web to tremble. If they wanted to take a more grounded approach with this runestone, it may be given to Kratos as a reminder that everyone that is subject to destiny has the power to change it, as opposed to guiding him to a particular location. As you may gather, the Norse viewpoint of fate was pretty convoluted, and it's just another aspect that I'm very eager to see Sony Santa Monica handle. They have apparently taken a very unique approach with the concept of Yggdrasil, which might imply that they are doing things a bit differently with the way destiny is handled. I hope you guys found this video interesting, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It is only a matter of time before we get the news that God of War has gone gold, but I don't think I can be any more excited than I already am. I will speak to you guys again very soon.